Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this episode of Defense News Weekly, a conversation with the highest-ranking officer in the Navy. Admiral Daryl Caudle was sworn in on August 25, 2025, as the 34th Chief of Naval Operations. As 2025 drew to a close, he joined us to talk about America's global naval presence, the future of shipbuilding, and personnel issues for sailors around the world. We're covering topics large and small for the Navy on this week's episode. So join us for the latest in news and analysis from the Pentagon to the platoon here on Defense News Weekly. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. Admiral Daryl Caudle is a former submarine commander who has risen to become the highest-ranking officer in the Navy, the Chief of Naval Operations, overseeing the vast American fleet. As 2025 wound down, Caudle sat down with Navy Times reporter Riley Cedar to talk about a wide range of topics. Here's some of their conversation.
Well, thanks for speaking with us today. Really appreciate your time. Happy holidays.
You too.
So just to kick things off, how is the strategic environment that the Navy is operating in 2026 different than maybe 5 or 10 years ago? What changes need to be made to ensure that the Navy remains at the top of the evolutionary spirit? I know you've talked in the past about narrowing the gap between, near-peer adversaries and things of that nature.
Well, I think in my 40 years, I would say this by far has to be the most complex geopolitical environment I've seen. A lot of that goes to, the capabilities and the cost of entry lowering every year to get really, really good asymmetric capability. And so more folks can actually enter what we would consider something that would only have been considered to be something that a peer adversary would have had even 5 years ago. We saw this a bit in the Red Sea against the Houthis there with their drone systems and missile systems. And during that 5-year period, though, our peer adversaries, this is like Russia and China and others, have grown significantly in their capability in that short amount of time. China in particular, you can just look and just see the rate of their production, their defense budgets and their spending and capability and capacity is significant. And Russia has put a lot of effort into asymmetric weapons, asynchronous weapons, and offset capabilities to demonstrate the additional threats that we have to face in our Navy day to day. And so, that landscape changes very quickly. The threat environment changes very quickly. And so staying ahead of that is a challenge for the U.S. Navy because of just the complexity and just our responsibility to be able to do this all over the globe.
And one of the ways, to maintain the most lethal fighting force is to ensure adequate quality of life for service members carrying out those combat missions. You recently visited Naval Base Guam, I believe on November 19th. The U.S. Navy recently awarded a $297 million contract to design and build replacement housing units at Andersen Air Force Base by December 2028. And that was after Navy Secretary John Phelan visited Andersen Air Force Base on May 2nd. And he had mentioned that the buildings looked condemned. And that was also after Vice Admiral Scott Gray had ordered inspections of all those barracks housing those sailors to be conducted. So my question to you is, what is the Navy doing currently to ensure adequate living conditions for all service members?
Well, I've made it perfectly clear, I think, to everyone that knows me and to certainly the sailors that are out there in our great Navy that I am a Sailors First Chief of Naval Operations. Now, I prioritize the foundry, the fleet, and the way we fight, and sailors is part of the total force of sailors and civilians and contractors, people. And I'm a people-centric Chief of Naval Operations. And so I care a lot about their quality of service, which is the sum total of their quality of life initiatives that we have in place and the quality of work, both, and make sure that the quality of service is something that they can be proud of to serve in, but they can be effective as a total sailor across body, mind, and spirit. Certainly their living conditions is one of those things. So a couple of things there. I am completely lockstep with the Secretary on making sure that where our sailors live is mold and mildew free. It's clean. It's aesthetically pleasing to the eye, that they're proud to call that home, that we work to make sure that it's properly air conditioned, that we're putting Wi-Fi in so they have Wi-Fi at a decent bandwidth, that they can do the things they need to do to be effective in their personal life and professional life, and that they have access to good food on the bases as well. So all that's extremely important to me. And the last thing I would say is, when I came in, I had about something between 8,000 to 10,000 sailors, surface ships, sailors living on ships, that I wanted to get off those ships. I think you should work and live in a different place. And we've been in a steady decline on that to make that initiative come true. So I'm very proud of the work we're doing on that initiative to make sure that sailors who are living on ships get off of that, and that they're living in high quality barracks. And when they come ashore, it's a good place for them to call home. So
we're talking about the personnel side of things. And that's one element of what you mentioned, the Foundry, the fleet, and the flight initiative you mentioned on X many times. And on the flip side of the personnel are the ships on which they sail and the readiness rates of those ships. You've stated that one of your big goals is that by January 2027, 80% of the Navy's ships, submarines, and aircraft will be combat surge ready. How do you ensure that?
Well, it's a challenge. If I look across what we call PESTO lines, which are people, equipment, the supply, the training, and ordnance, to make sure all those things can support a goal that 80% of our operational Navy is combat surge ready is a challenge across, many of those letters that I just laid out. We have gaps at sea, and we're working hard on that. We've had record recruiting, to make sure that we're bringing in, this year alone, like 46,000 sailors to chip away at the ships that don't have enough sailors on board. And I think, that we will, by the time I end as CNO, will have solved the gaps at sea problem. I'm working very closely with the Secretary of the Navy and Undersecretary of War to accelerate munitions delivery. We have a lot of munitions that are on contract that haven't delivered. So we're working with the Defense Industrial Base, those who build our munitions, to make sure we make good on those deliveries. And we actually put enough money in to ensure that we're staying up on munitions. You can't win a war without munitions. Backlog of supply parts are a challenge. We use that as a bill payer at the end of the fiscal year frequently, and that accumulates over time. Ships can't be self-sufficient at sea without the parts and the supply lockers they need to actually make those repairs. And then last is training. And so to be combat surge ready, you have to be certified and meet a certification event to be licensed to say, I can flow you into combat. And so we have a model for that in the submarine force, the surface Navy, and aviation Navy to certify those sailors and crews to be combat surge ready. I think we got a good model for that, and we're healthy there. So across those things, people, I've got some problems that I'm working on that I need to fix. Accelerate munitions through the efforts we're working with the Undersecretary of War, and get those backlog of supply parts done to actually make good on that.
When we come back, a look at how the CNO sees the future of the Navy's unmanned fleet and what it means for sailors. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. As the Navy looks to help revitalize the shipbuilding industry, it will have to balance how much of an increased construction capacity should be dedicated to unmanned systems. Here's Chief of Naval Operations Daryl Caudle on how he sees the effort going forward.
We're talking about ensuring that ships and vessels meet a certain percentile of readiness. One of the ways, and we're kind of touching on it now, is by reinvigorating the Maritime industrial base. How does the Navy and potential partners, maybe the South Korean shipbuilders, plan to do that? How do you plan to do that in the year ahead, the next 5 years? How does that look?
I don't think I've ever served in a time when I've seen the Navy, Congress, and Office of Secretary of War, everyone's on the same page here. There is no daylight between any stakeholder, and I think the American people as well, that shipbuilding in the United States is something that needs to be reinvigorated. That's commercial shipbuilding and certainly naval combat ships. So we're all on the same page. And so I think Congress is working hard to fund that initiative. And so what we have to do now is make sure we can work with the defense industrial base, the submarine industrial base, and the shipbuilding writ large to take those monies and convert that into output improvements. That's workforce improvements, lower attrition, better retention, better training, more resilient supply chains. A lot of these second and third tier suppliers, don't have steady demand signals, so they don't stay in the game long enough, so that I end up having challenges with long lead time material, which forces me not to have the parts on hand when I want to repair or do new construction. So that's in play as well. Automation on the work floors, on the production floors, needs to be improved. We do too much by hand. There's too much artisan work going on and not enough automation where we have high reproducibility and the ability to actually have higher output with fewer people. All of that needs to be worked with through the lens of leveraging our foreign partners. And I think they have a vital role in this. You've seen Hanwha Shipbuilding, a South Korean company, purchase the Philadelphia shipyard. I love that idea. But I think there's even more that can be done to leverage them even within their own country. When we pass laws like the Jones Act, those laws are passed with a set of assumptions that are made at the time the law is passed. A certain political and geopolitical environment, a certain threat environment, a certain belief that the United States has a certain capacity. All of those assumptions need to be revisited. And I believe that law is a bit antiquated, and we need to be able to open up to some additional foreign shipbuilders to help us build ships now while we get our own internal shipbuilding up to speed to help bridge me into that future.
And part of those shipbuilding efforts that you're speaking about are building out an unmanned fleet, whether it's surface drones or whether it's subsurface drones. So how does the sailor, the future sailor, fit into those efforts and do an increasingly unmanned world? How do you envision sailors' roles evolving or maybe even being potentially eliminated with the advent of this, technological innovation? You've got AI, and maybe that requires less human intervention. What, in your mind, is that perfect harmony between, that future sailor, that human, and machine operations?
I think it's a whole new set of competencies. We need sailors that, and I've got this in motion, in fact, that have a deep understanding in general. The general sailor, and I'll get to the more specific case, needs in today's world a deeper understanding of artificial intelligence, how those types of capabilities are used, how to leverage them just to do day-to-day tasks. So large language models and chat GPTs and Gen AI and capabilities like that must be leveraged to allow the sailor to do things what was taking hours to do historically can be done in minutes. In a much more reproducible and higher quality way. So all administrative tasks need to be leveraging these types of AI capabilities. So every sailor needs some degree of understanding of that. That starts at boot camp, goes through their A schools and their C schools, all the way up through their career development. I should be giving them more understanding of artificial intelligence. There are specific rates that are going to be involved with unmanned robotic and autonomous systems. They need even more education in this that deals with how to leverage programming capabilities that do, write code, and how to leverage that code to do mission planning for these systems, how to maintain these attritable and sometimes fungible systems that are brand new, that are not the typical type ship systems that we're used to. Things that have, they're basically battery powered, things that need resilient command and control networks to operate, things that have remote, joystick type capability and how you actually operate them in situ. That curricula and that training modules need to be developed in a way that sailors learn today. And that's through essentially YouTube type delivery. So a lot of things need to be done to revamp that. Our continuous training curriculum that we're building to go do those things are in motion. It takes time to get that done. But that is where we're moving as a Navy, to improve the competencies of those specific skills.
Staying on the topic of combat readiness, the Navy has devoted a considerable amount of resources to the Southcom area of operations. Does that allocation of resources jeopardize combat readiness in other theaters, such as the Indo-Pacific? How does the service plan to maintain the posture in the Southcom area of operations while maintaining a naval supremacy that you've spoken about, that you said is important to deterring, near-peer adversaries? Is there any concern at all that the devotion of those resources to the Southcom area of operations might be stretching the service thin at all?
The Navy's responsibility to generate force generates it based on the capacity we have. So and then we go through a global force management adjudication process to determine which combatant commanders get those forces. So the Navy's got a conveyor belt in peacetime to generate those forces based on how much capacity I have and the number of ships I have available. They're not in depot and other things like that have an output that's fixed. So if the Secretary of War and the chairman and the Southcom commander need forces to go to U.S. Southern Command, that's fine. So I'll give you an example. The fact that the Forward Strike Group is operating in the Southern Command area of operations and not in the European or Central Command is not changing any additional resource drain on the Navy. It's just where it's currently operating. The bigger challenge for me, and the thing I push back on, is when those deployments get extended. So as long as I generate what the Navy can generate, and we make decisions on where they go with some strategic discipline, and we don't try to overextend those deployments, then it's okay. It will not be an additional drain. But when we basically design the system for 7-month deployments, and they start doing 8 and 9-month deployments, then I have a problem. That impacts sailor quality of life. It impacts, families. It impacts the readiness of those systems. It impacts how I do contractual maintenance agreements, because now when the start date was supposed to start is not being met. So that's a problem for me. And then perhaps most important is the next loop of deployment is now postponed. So it's kind of short-term vision that actually has long-term impact on when I'll need those forces in the future. So the extension is the problem for a service chief, not where they operate, as long as we don't exceed the capacity of the Navy.
When we come back, it's the holiday spending hangover time, and our financial expert returns with tips for how to reset your finances. Stay with us. Welcome back. It's easy to binge on holiday spending, but with the arrival of 2026, it's time to get back on a financial diet. On this episode of Money Minute, Jeanette Mack from Navy Federal Credit Union returns with tips for resetting your spending in the new year.
Did the holidays leave your wallet feeling a little or maybe a lot lighter? You're not alone. Many of us overspend during the festive season, but now's the perfect time to get your finances back on track. First, take a clear look at your money situation. Gather your credit card bills, list what you owe, and note the minimum payments and interest rates. This snapshot is your starting line. Next, prioritize your repayment strategy. Focus on paying the highest interest cards first while making minimum payments on the rest. If you can, consider transferring balances to a lower rate card or consolidating debt to make things simpler. Now build a realistic budget. Factor in your regular expenses like groceries and monthly bills and expenses alongside your debt payments. This helps you stay on top of where your money is going and how much you have to spend or save without falling behind on essentials. Stay organized. Open statements as soon as they arrive. Track due dates and adjust your plan as needed. Developing this habit can help you avoid late fees and keep your credit healthy. Remember, it's the small steps today that lead to big wins tomorrow. So turn that holiday wallet hangover into a fresh start for the new year.
To get more coverage of military and defense topics, pop out of that submarine hatch and scan the horizon for militarytimes.com and defensenews.com for more headlines. And to be the most up-to-date commander in the silent service, sign up for our early bird brief compiled each morning, bringing you the most recent news. And if social media is where you collect open source intelligence, follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and X. And for you junior troops, we're on TikTok, so go follow us there as well. When we come back, more from our conversation with Chief of Naval Operations Daryl Caudle. Don't go away. Welcome back. To close out the show this week, here's more from reporter Riley Cedar's conversation with Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Daryl Caudle, focusing on the Navy's mission in Southcom. Check it out.
Speaking of the Southcom area of responsibility, there's obviously been no shortage of news stories coming out of that region right now, specifically regarding the U.S. military strikes against alleged drug-carrying vessels in the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific Ocean. How do you see that mission progressing and evolving, and what does success look like there?
Well, I think the president has made it very clear, along with the Secretary of War, that a threat to the homeland which is a primary focus of the national security strategy, the Western Hemisphere, is a concern of theirs. They view, and I share this view, that drug flow into the United States is a big threat to the United States. So they have taken on the actual daunting task to actually try to counter that, and working really hard day to day with using military force, Coast Guard, law enforcement, intelligence agencies to try to counter that flow of drugs into the United States. It's my job to provide those forces, and then Southern Command's job to employ those forces in accordance to the rule of engagement that are provided to the combatant commander and those mission priorities.
It's currently the holidays, as we can see from the decorations. The Army recently announced a service-wide initiative to check in on service members during the holidays, checking on their mental health. How's the Navy checking in on service members' mental health during the holidays, and then overall, just in terms of the whole year?
There is nothing that hurts me more than to lose a sailor to suicide, and to know that a sailor is struggling, or their family members with mental health challenges. So it is a big priority of me and the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy. We both have this as a focus area, and we use every resource possible to ensure we're doing that. But as you said, I think, and it's the best way to say this, nothing, regardless I can do medically or I can check in on them at my level, is more important than sailors checking in on sailors, watching each other's back, seeing and being intrusive and knowing when they're struggling, understanding simple things like, are they financially challenged? Are they having marital or relationship problems? Are they coming in late to work? Are they having trouble sleeping? These basic cues that makes us know that we need to do more. Are the high-risk sailors in a command really being managed properly? Are we making sure we're being aggressive and giving them the resources they need?
How do you hope that the Navy will be different between now and the end of your time as CNO? What's the legacy that you hope to leave behind?
I hope that the Navy I leave behind is one that every sailor knows that I value them greatly, that they know I valued their families and the contributions they do every single day, that they know how much I appreciate them volunteering to serve in something bigger than themselves, to wear the cloth of the nation, to serve with honor, courage, and commitment. That I leave the Navy in a better place to be ready to fight, that the readiness of the Navy is really at a world-class level. The things I told you before, that the ship's magazines are filled with the ordnance, that those deliveries are happening on time, that there are no more gaps at sea. It's that captains are having to be creative with how they man the watch bills because they got the right number of people that they need. When ships are at sea, sailors have the competency they need and the repair parts to fix their ships to keep those ships at sea. And that the quality of life and quality of service initiatives that we need to put in, along with the foundry initiatives, which are things like schoolhouses, the infrastructure of our bases, piers, the hangars, that all those things that we typically want to neglect so that we can buy capabilities, that we've actually prioritized those, and just over this 4-year period that we put the energy and resources in to make the foundry of our Navy world-class.
That's all the time we have in this episode. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.